Hello everyone and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Dr. Gretchen Green. Dr. Green is a physician, entrepreneur, global advocate for innovation in healthcare, and flew on Blue Origin's 12th spaceflight on May 31st, 2025. As a radiologist and founder of multiple healthcare and technology ventures, she has become a leading voice on how emerging technologies, from AI to digital health to space medicine, are reshaping the human experience. With 40 years of dedication to space exploration, Dr. Green is deeply involved in a growing conversation around the role humanity's next frontier will play in transforming life here on Earth. Whether discussing longevity, innovation, ethics, or the psychological impact of exploration, she brings a rare combination of scientific rigor, entrepreneurial thinking, and genuine curiosity about where we're headed as a species. She retired from practicing medicine in 2024. She's a fellow of the American College of Radiology, a fellow of the American Association for Women Radiologists, a nationally recognized medical legal expert witness, and now serves on the board of the U.S. Space and Rocket Center Education Foundation. A little fun fact, at the age of 16, she bicycled across the U.S. to end world hunger, and in 2022, she reached the North Pole. Dr. Green, welcome to the Future Space.
Thanks so much for having me.
You've been a high achiever from an early age, I can see. 16, trying to end world hunger.
Yes, although I think my goals really started when I was 2, when I told my parents I was either going to be a surgeon or an elevator operator.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Gretchen, what would be your 3 words that capture the essence of space?
My 3 words are awe, wonder, and joy.
So 40 years of love of space exploration. At 2, you wanted to either be elevator operator. Give me a little bit more context on that. Who comes up at the age of 2 and know what they want to do?
I can't explain because I can't remember ever a time in my life where I didn't want to be a doctor, which is of course ultimately what I did. But there was something about, I must have seen someone in a hotel who was an elevator operator, and I loved how they got to talk to people and then push the buttons and the elevator went where they said it to go. But one of the little known facts is that I actually did sort of get to be an elevator operator for a moment also on launch day, because you can take the stairs up the 7 flights up to the launch pad to board the New Shepard rocket, or you can take the elevator, and there is actually a button that you can press, although it's not quite so fun as the one in Cape Canaveral that says space, which I also hope to get to press one day, but it does take you to the top of the launch pad structure. And so when they asked if anyone wanted to push the button, I raised my hand right away and got to push the button. So I'm just getting to do all my life goals.
The concept of an elevator is very interesting. Just if you look at what it is, when it came up, it was the first time ever in our society in where you would be confined into a small space and where you can move through different environments or different worlds, which had never kind of happened before. Even, you have to go up on stairs or you're traveling on a horse or things like that. It was a very individual experience, and now suddenly you're confined with people and then you have to figure out how to spend that time. Was there anyone like your parents or your family that was a doctor? Like the genes of a doctor, I guess?
No, in fact, I was the first woman in my line of my family to graduate from college.
Well, congratulations on that. Dr. Green, knowing the biology of our species and understanding the limitations of space, one question always arises is, do we have a place beyond the planet in space?
I think one of the most amazing things about going to space is how it reveals our greatest desires and our opportunity to reach for something that's so difficult it demands our best. One of the projects that I've been working on after launching with Blue Origin is to understand better what is the motivation for people who want to go to space as commercial astronauts. And one opportunity that we have to study that is the Blue Origin astronaut biographies. Everyone writes one after the first 2 missions, that is, for their biography that goes on the website prior to launch. So it's a little bit of a time capsule of what was someone thinking and feeling as they were preparing for launch. And in analyzing that, my daughter and I produced a research project using AI, and we found 12 traits that are common to the way people describe themselves prior to launching on Blue Origin. And then, of course, there are 6 astronauts who launched twice. So they have another opportunity to get a snapshot of the change from before the first to before the second flight. What we found is increasingly Blue Origin commercial astronauts have been evolving from the traditional explorer mindset to bringing the mission to space back to Earth through communication, education, music in some ways. A number of astronauts have musical backgrounds. So things that are not the typical archetype for an astronaut, but also environmentalism. So we're really finding that there has been an evolution of that mission, which is in keeping with Blue Origin's goal to have millions of people living and working in space and paving that road, bringing people back to Earth as well.
Is space exploration very different than any previous exploration, in where that sense of perspective gives you context and appreciation to what you have back home? We can, remember age of exploration and where they would come back wanting to share these discoveries and the knowledge and the information. Is space exploration very different than that, or is just the format is changing a little bit, but the principle is the same?
I think the principles of exploration, of going to a new place, of wanting to bring something back from there, whether with travel, that's a souvenir, or a memory, or a different way of thinking with the overview effect. I think there's a lot of commonality, but space is a few orders of magnitude more difficult and rarer. But I think the best way that we can make that accessible to people is understanding that commonality. Whether you're talking about polar expeditions, I've been doing a lot of continued reading after having gone to the North Pole and then done this, and different extremes that I've had through my life and opportunities in those situations. I've really been doing a lot of thinking about the similarities of that mindset. And so there's a lot of, I think, the human mindset that helps us adapt to extreme situations, but that's different for every person. So it's not an absolute that space is necessarily the most extreme. There can be everyday experiences that for different people are relatively extreme. And that's the lesson I think we can help everybody learn.
For me, the spirit of exploration is not limited to doing crazy things or going to places. The spirit of exploration is very much with the intent of going outside of your comfort zone with the specific purpose of learning or discovery. And so if you're a 9-to-5 person, very set into a predictable schedule, being an explorer just means stepping out of that predictability so that you can grow and you can learn. The spirit of exploration is very much different than going and conquer a mountain. And that's all my work has been very focused on, making sure the understanding of that difference so that everybody can come to the table and we can discuss exploration. Because it's not necessarily about conquering Everest or doing crazy things, walking alone across a continent just by yourself. That is one specific world of exploration, but the spirit of exploration can be applied to a lot more. So what has been motivating you throughout all these years, starting to be, obviously a doctor, but your curiosity? It looks like curiosity really fills your life, and not just as a doctor, but just as a human species, right?
Absolutely. I thought medicine was just the most fascinating, interesting job. And I thought about other jobs along the way, but I was always pulled back to medicine. And once I found out about radiology as a specialty, even though first I thought I was going to go into emergency medicine, but then I got introduced to radiology. And it was, again, endlessly fascinating with different technologies, ways of using physics and energy to see inside the human body and to help diagnose and treat disease. So that was very much the intellectual part that I was drawn to. What I never expected, though, was work I had started doing when I was a teenager in high school. We had the option in a history class of choosing to take the final exam or to write a research paper. And since I felt the research paper was more predictable, I had more control over that I had a better chance of doing well on that. So I embarked on this research project on the history of women in medicine, specifically twilight sleep. And this is an obstetric anesthesia technique that women who traveled, and this comes to your earlier question about why do we venture from home? Is it a personal experience or is it for collective good? Many women who traveled to Germany around 1915 did so they could experience twilight sleep and have painless childbirth. Then they brought that technique back to America, which was not easy in 1915 with World War I and travel restrictions. They then insisted that physicians go and also learn the technique so that more women could benefit. This was exactly because they said, if men will get morphine for a battlefield wound, why don't women get morphine, which is actually used in twilight sleep, or other pain relief for the everyday occurrence in women's lives of childbirth and perpetuating the species? And so they really did it as an equality measure, but they did so in a very typical progressive era way for a collective good. So seeing that and then doing a number of different history papers and continuing my research over years, I entered medicine with this parallel view, both of being a physician, having technology to help people, but also knowing that patients were very active participants. And it happened that during my career as a breast radiologist, that really came to play. That I saw patients being activists and advocating for legislation that changed the way we had to report mammographic reports. And it was because they sought to have information and knowledge that they felt could improve their care and decrease their chances of getting a delayed diagnosis of breast cancer. But really, this extends to everyone who's a patient. I think we have a collective desire as people and as patients to want to be healthy and to live and to benefit from medicine and technology. So now, seeing at this part of my life, it's truly become a really interesting combination of things. And all of which I would agree goes back to curiosity. How do we improve? How do we work together? How do we use technology to improve human health? And now, as I'm helping companies bring those medical research missions back to meaning on Earth, how do we use space to accelerate that kind of knowledge and impact?
So there were two thoughts in the back of my mind. Previously, our understanding of the world was very linear or limited. We thought people think like this today, but they think as the human almost separated of an environment. It just exists in its vacuum. And then the human body is just to be analyzed, when in reality, we are a product of an environment. Senses exist because there's something to sense. We have legs because nature wants us to move around. We don't exist in a vacuum. We're constantly reacting to an environment around us. And then the other thing also that we realize more and more is we are a very successful species. We've used technology to actually step above the randomness of nature and create predictability and stability. Because when you're in the world of medicine, you discover how nature really works, and it's not very safe. It's actually pretty aggressive. And I think that as a species, we've forgotten how the privilege or that safe environment that we've created over the years, even just surgery, all the treatment that now we take for granted. But it is a very complicated world out there, right?
Absolutely. During the beginning of the COVID pandemic in 2020, I remember how many times I encountered the word uncertain. And people would talk about this in the media of how it was almost this novel experience that we were in these uncertain times. And I stepped back from it and said, I don't remember ever getting a guarantee about anything at any other point in my life. And that it seems uncertainty and unpredictability have been the rule, not the exception. I think if we look at the silver lining to those clouds, we can think about adaptability and embracing uncertainty. And if I had spent my life thinking my dreams would unfold the way that they could have looked years ago, the way that things actually evolved would never have happened. Because, take my flight on Blue Origin, for example. When I was a kid, age 12, going to space camp, watching the shuttle go up and trying to imagine how I could fit into that mold, I couldn't. Because I couldn't have qualified for NASA. I tried later and wasn't selected, but that's okay. But the way that I ultimately achieved that goal didn't even exist. So the more that we can have flexibility and embrace those ups and downs and the unpredictability, I think the more opportunity we will see.
That is one thing, like for me, going down a river, I can tell you how the river is going to be, where it's going to be, but at the same time, there's always going to be the unexpected. So what I can do is I can teach you the skills to face anything and understanding that every capsize will be an opportunity for growth. And this is what we do great as a species. We figure things out. And going to space, a lot of people say, oh, going to space is very different. This is going to be so much more harder than everything that we've done before. But also our capacity to figure things out have increased with those risks, right? When people go and say, the age of exploration, it was their environment, water, it's predictable. Yes, we're looking back with the knowledge that we have today, but back in those days, they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. There's hundreds of thousands of people who died in the process of exploration because they didn't know about scurvy, they didn't know about longitude. It was a miserable experience. Now we're going to space, and yes, it's very different, but we already have robots on Mars that are collecting information, that are gathering all the knowledge that we need. So even by the time we show up, we won't be as blind as some of the earlier explorers. It's really going to be interesting. You must be absolutely inspired and fascinated about this new era that we're entering.
Absolutely. And I loved how the Artemis 2 crew noticed that when they were going around the moon, it was so critical to have humans there real time to take photos of the moon as they passed behind it to areas that had never been documented before. I thought that was really interesting because that's one of the sensing features that seems very easy to build into a mission, an unmanned mission. You would think that you could visually record something pretty easily, just do a movie or a series of high definition rapid fire photos. But we need to remember that human element that's really important, even when we think it's a predictable type situation, which we could have just point a camera, take pictures, but was actually discovered to be critically dynamic with human involvement. And something that you said with explorers didn't know where they were going. They knew where they wanted to end up, but they didn't know how to get there. And their maps were, as you can read in the text in the books about the Jeanette exploration, you realize they were dealing with charts of which there was just a lot of gray area in between. And sometimes there were things on the map that were imagined or hypothetical, and yet they still ended up on the map. And, this has been true in a lot of the big journeys that I've had in my life with cycling across America. We didn't know at the time, I was 16 at the time, but we didn't know that this group of teenagers from all over the world who came together to end world hunger, we didn't know that we were the first group to go from east to west across the US as teenagers on bicycles. The reason is no one goes voluntarily from east to west because the wind is in your face the whole time. So you're picking the hard way to go. We also had a map and it showed the route. We knew we had to get from Washington, D.C. to Seattle, Washington. And we knew we had to be in Seattle on an exact date because we were cycling in the opening ceremonies for the Goodwill Games. So we couldn't change the destination or the timing. And we thought that there was a map and it showed a line and it connected through the various states. But the reality of how that journey unfolded was very different. We did sometimes stick to that map. And even in a time where we had no internet, no cell phones, we were in relatively uncharted territory also. And we managed to get there. Same thing with the North Pole. On the ship that I was fortunate to be on, the Charcot, they have digital readouts of your location to 8 significant digits of decimals, just astounding accuracy thanks to GPS and other space-derived tools. And yet, this would sometimes send out the helicopter to scout out the ice. And sometimes we would try to break ice in a certain path, and then you'd have to back up or perch a little differently on another shelf of ice to try to break through that way. So it was very dynamic and unpredictable. So even though we had that map of how it could be done, every one of those trips is different too. And our return trip from the North Pole is not the same as our trip approaching it. You can look at the 2 maps that are superimposed on the same, and the lines are totally different and very squiggly. So I guess that's my continued lesson from all these things are the lines are different and very squiggly.
You need to have that hook. You need to have that carrot, that propels you to go beyond, to push the boundaries, but you also have to leave room for the unexpected to happen. When I planned my expeditions back in the days of Field of Wild, this is how I planned it. I would always plan about 50% of it, and then I would leave 50% out for the unexpected. This is where the magic happens. This is where you discover the thing that you didn't think about or you didn't know, or you meet someone that tells you, no, you need to go over there. You need to meet my uncle, and he's going to take you to that other place. And if you haven't made room for this, you won't be exposed to these opportunities. And when people talk about Mars and the moon, often I'm reminded of North America was not the intended destination. It was Asia and the spice route. And in the process, they discovered, oh my God, look at this place. Obviously, there were mistakes that were done, but back in those days, they were doing it with the way that they knew how to do it. But when we go to space, we're thinking Mars is going to be the destination. And my guess is that we're going to discover other places or other solutions that will make more sense than maybe settling on Mars. Well, we might settle on Mars, but it might not be the solution that's going to paint the picture of tomorrow. Do you think about that when you look up to space?
I do. I think we're experimenting. And we're experimenting with different aspects of exploration, which ultimately are going to help us develop different characteristics in ourselves. But we're not going to know how it turns out, because that's the point of an experiment, is make a hypothesis, and then we perform an experiment and we see how it goes. When I think about developments in space biotech and in new products, pharma, materials, we are at the very beginning of this process. And that's why experimentation and the allowance for that, the freedom of the unknown, is what's going to give us results that then we have to use a different lens to understand what they mean for us.
I wrote this piece about how we will be living longer just because the scale of the universe demands it. Being 100 years old on the planet is okay. I don't think that there would be any point to live 200 years on this planet. I think it would actually work against you. But in space, the scale of everything demands that obviously you can go above 100 years. And that's going to be achieved both by technology and evolution and biology. What do you think are the biggest challenges for our evolution as a species in space?
I think a challenge is understanding how many different people will be needed to expand our role. Just how diverse a population of explorers we will need to be able to understand and inform growth in space is something that, from our left-brained scientific approach, I think is going to really require a flexibility for us to look at various talents and different ways of thinking to really expand our reach.
On the biology side, do you think that we're going to find a tool or a way to deal with radiation or to deal with gravity or something that we have to navigate around? Or technology-wise, what are you looking into?
I don't think there's any question we will have to find adaptations. It will either come from our direction or from the environment that we create. So yes, the radiation challenge is huge. There are, I think, a number of people who think this may not be surmountable given current technology, because they look at gamma rays and other different energy spectra and say, we just don't possess the technology or the knowledge to shield from those things adequately. But maybe it will take a different approach. Maybe we will take a biological approach to that. Maybe gene editing or gene therapy or something very dynamic, maybe powered with AI as you go along, where it changes during the mission. Maybe those things will be necessary to work with different conditions. But I think we have to have the flexibility of thinking to understand we're a component and the environment is a component, but we'll have to innovate either way, and we're going to figure it out.
There's so many things that people thought was impossible, and then it became possible. This is, for me, one of my biggest pet peeves when they say things can't be done or can be done. And it's actually, it doesn't work now, but it can work. One actually makes a statement and there's nowhere to go from. Like when you say I can or it can't be done, okay, what's next? It's very limiting. It's a statement that is very singular, but if you say it doesn't work, then it's the understanding that it's a dynamic problem and you just have to figure out how to make it work. And understanding also that it might work today, it might not work tomorrow, because solutions Even we look at some of the things that we deal today that are now problematic. But when they came out as a solution, and they thought that like they would save everything, like even plastic. They thought that plastic was going to be the biggest invention that was going to save the planet. And now it's a problem. So understanding how these things evolve so that you can be prepared is always a very good strategy, as opposed to think, we're going to reach a point where everything is going to be working and we won't have to do anything anymore. That will always lead to disaster.
I agree. We're never going to reach a time of utopia where we're done. But we do all spend our lives, I think, hoping. And I remember as a kid thinking, well, when you're an adult, that's just a time period and you stop. Like you're an adult at age whatever, and then you just remain that adult. And you have it all figured out and you know how it goes. And I never expected that I would just be continuing to even more rapidly try to figure it out as we go along. But I think the word yet is very powerful. I haven't done it yet. It hasn't occurred yet, because it allows for possibility. And when we're open to that possibility that things are dynamic, that we will find a way to do it, that helps you to get started.
There are certain words that I really cannot stand, and utopia is one of those. Is the understanding that there's a place where you can reach where everything will be in harmony or perfect. And the reality is that nature, life, doesn't want perfection, because there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to grow, there's nowhere to learn. If you've reached a point of perfection, it is the most boring place to reach in life. In fact, you will never be able to reach it because life doesn't work like that. But even if you reached it, it would be the most uninteresting place to be in life. And I think that it's one of the most, if we've changed something in our society, is very much going from a place where we thought everything was just static. The brain, once you reach being an adult, it's set, there's nothing else that you can do, to a world of it's always dynamic. And like you just said, or I've worked all my life, I'm going to retire from this, but I can start something new. It's always up to us to redefine what we can do. And that actually really changes your approach to life, because it cultivates the sense of curiosity. Spending a lot of time in the last 2 years with Shatner, 95, still so hungry for curiosity and constantly looking how to learn. David Attenborough, 100 years old, still that curious mind. Once you understand that, it just opens up a life of being an endless student.
It does. And I think when you start to take evidence that you can overcome difficult things and put them to work for good, that's a real superpower. Because our brains are wired to want comfort and to feel safe and to not take chances. That's how we stayed safe in the cave a long time ago. And we always want to do that. But for me, over the past 5 years, it has been a tremendous time of personal challenge and of growth. When I started to learn how to harness the tough times and really surf them, I would almost think them like, if you go over the top of the crest of the wave and then you crash down to the trough and then you get to ride up to the next crest. If you're not focusing so much on the feeling of falling down, you can really start to enjoy that momentum that comes from going back up the other side. And it's a tough way to do it, but the way that, for me, I've been able to achieve these much higher heights of goals and things that otherwise may have seemed impossible. But it really is something to embrace the turbulence of life and to figure how you can grow through it and always keep working onward and upward.
Well, first of all, the high is only highs in comparison to the lows. If you don't have any lows, then they just become your baseline. Everything is tension, and I say that stillness is not the absence of tension, is balance within tensions around you. And you want tension, like your heart, you want your heart to have that tension. That's the only way that it can beat. And when you're on the sailboat, you want the wind. You don't want to be at the mercy of the wind. You want to be able to control the wind so you get from point A to point B. Same thing with trees. Trees need to have tension so it can rise up and grab the light from the sun. But too much tension, then you become super fragile and will break easy. So it's having this kind of dance between these tensions so you can move forward. Do you think that that's actually, When you're talking about this uncomfortable place, this resilience to learn, do you think that the younger generation is struggling right now with this understanding that you need to be uncomfortable, you need to go through the hardship of life? I think that we went from a place where a certain generation felt unloved and they overcompensated and trying to protect and nurture and give all the love. And it all came from a very good place. But the unintended consequences, that sheltering from all the badness in the world, has also created a certain weakness into how to face life.
Yes, my crew member 7, Jake Mills, recommended a fantastic book to me called The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. And I think it examines this topic just beautifully of the tension of being in uncomfortable situations and the benefits. Also the loss, though. What is your life like in the absence of it? It's more monotonous. Time passes differently because you don't have dynamics to push against. And when I think about some of the most meaningful things in my life, the bike trip is one of those. It was extraordinarily uncomfortable, physically, emotionally, psychologically, interpersonally. And because we had students from all over the world, a lot of whom we didn't speak each other's languages even. So even basic communication became a challenge. One of my good friends from there, she was in the group from the Soviet Union. At the time, they were the Soviet Union, now Russia. And she didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Russian, but we both spoke French. And so we learned to communicate together in French during that trip. So finding ways of bridging, I think, and helping each other, having a collective consciousness is going to be something that's much more important, especially for the younger generations, than just all the maxing that's going on with people's individual pursuits towards self-improvement in a focused way. I think the more we step back and remember that we're part of an environment and a community, the more we will have collective strength to deal with what may be even greater challenges. In some ways, life is much easier than it ever has been, but in other ways, it may be more challenging.
The character comes out of the hardship of life. And one of my observation in a relationship, even with food in Europe, one of the reasons why food is so important, or in other societies also, older societies, is if you have a history of hardships, things that you took for granted are taken away from you, there's one thing that remains is gathering over bread. And you can find hope. If you can have bread and you can gather around, you will have hope. And when you come out of those hardships, you keep these rituals to remind you that independently of what can happen in the world, if you can gather at the table, you will find the meaning of life. And here in the US, we're a very, very young society, and we're still like the teenager that believes in the black and white. We haven't lost too much. And we take food as like, oh, it's just an input. It's more than that. It's a celebration of the human experience of what we can achieve together. But the hardship, couples, marriages, it's very easy to be in a couple on a vacation. But when you go through the hardship, that you really create the character and these bonds that can last through the ups and downs. The beauty, the richness of the human experience comes out.
I agree. And the more we can expect it to be hard, the more pleasantly surprised we may be.
Absolutely. I think it's better to expect it that's going to be worse than to expect it's going to be good. Because if you expect it to be harder, at least you're prepared for it, and you will grab the entire spectrum of the experience and you will come out stronger. If you think too much is going to be easy, then it's really going to be at your expense, and you risk actually to fall hard. And looking at some of the challenges right now in societies is really much with the expectation of things are going to be easy. And then when they face the hardship, they don't know exactly how to do, and you think it's going to be the end of the world. And that, for me, this is also one of the things in where we have to work hard to change that story. The narrative of like, we have 5 years to change the world, otherwise everything is doom, or the idea that now we're going to go and mess up other places other than the earth. It's not helping people come to the table and participate because it creates so much anxiety. And I'm pretty sure having a daughter, you experience that a lot.
Yes, and you just reminded me of something she asked me recently. And it's very similar to the question I often get asked, which is, how did I wait 40 years to get to go to space? Like, how did I just keep going for 40 years? The simple answer to that is, well, there wasn't a choice except to just keep going for the goal. But my daughter asked me the other day, as she's considering going into medicine, how did I spend so much time in training? 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 6 years of training afterward and a fellowship. And I said, one of the reasons why it wasn't a problem with getting to the goal was because I loved the process so much. And I think when we are very goal focused, we forget about the in-between. There's either here and then there's there. But it's the in-between that really can help us to become the person that we want to be through that goal. So for me, medical school, I loved every day of it. I loved every day of training, and this, the curiosity and the learning, those are just things that light me up. Yes, it was very, very hard every single day, and it required everything that I had to give to it. But it was that whole process that I knew you couldn't skip over. It just has to be the way that you go along to that goal. But you just have to remember there's a lot of in between the decision and then the goal itself. And that's even more important sometimes than part of the process. And I think that's another thing is when people realize, well, they achieve a goal and it doesn't feel like they expected. It's not that high point. This is the arrival fallacy, of course, where we think that once we get there, things will be better. And that's why that process is so important, that we can't lose sight of.
The idea of arrival to the destinations is a very binary way of looking at the world. It's been nurtured and fed with technology, with the on or off or one and zeros, and it makes you look at the world in this very black and white, obviously monotheism, heaven or hell, when in reality it's everything that's in between. Because if you look very much in the black and white, having a look at our lives, we're born and we're gonna die. And one person could say, well, what's the point? Well, the point is everything that's in between. That is the value. By itself, we don't mean much, but in the whole, we mean to the people that are around us. We create value in those moments. And if we go back to utopia, where we think that there's a destination, that's the danger, the illusion that you get to a place where everything is going to end and it's going to be perfect. But the reality is every mountain that you climb, you'll get to the peak and then suddenly you realize, oh my God, I see another one, or I see something else. Now I have all these skills that allow me to get to this place. Now I want to apply them to something else. There's never an end to anything. And every time that you think you're going to get to a place or you're going to find a technology that's going to help you solve this particular problem, it will create unintended consequences, and now you have to deal with that. For me, it's not something bad. There's a beauty to it because you're constantly learning and you're constantly growing and you're constantly discovering.
I agree. It's like when people ask me, how is it now that I'm back from space? What is that like? As though doing the mundane things, checking the mail, getting groceries, as though those were in no way as important as being in space. And I said, but the exciting thing about all those things is that I get to do them having been to space. So I'm doing those things as an astronaut. I get to check the mail, prepare food, knowing this is the context that I bring to it. And it's a little bit of a mental gymnastic feat in some ways, but it just as I felt the most present and mindful as I ever have before in my life for the days leading up to with training and then the flight itself, I can access that anytime I want because the choice to be present in that moment is accessible anytime.
Dr. Green, what would be your 3 words of wisdom?
Raise your hand before you're ready. So it's 3 plus 3 in a way. It's important to raise your hand, to take a chance to do something new. But it's just as important to do it before you feel ready, before you're ready, because that leap of faith that you will figure it out, that you will learn something along the way, no matter if you get to that destination or not, is, I think, what, at least in my life, has led to every opportunity. There has never been a time where I've said to myself, this seems like the perfect time to do that. I feel totally confident and ready, and I'll just go sign up for that. every single time. Even now, I'm still pushing, doing new things with space biotech and helping companies with that. And I have to remind myself that I can be qualified and feel ready to do those things because I decide to do so and to bring my skills, training, and expertise. But there's never going to be a time in your life where you feel completely confident either. So just, again, expecting that that's just the backdrop. And the way that you overcome it is just put your hand in the air, raise it, volunteer, be ready to take some chances before you feel ready.
Raising your hand and not being prepared, that's called stupidity. You want to be able to say, yes, I'm going to jump, but then you have to know how to fly or how to get back up. Be open to new experiences, but also understanding there's some training or learning that you have to be safe at the same time, because that will work against you. What's next for you, Dr. Green?
My goal is to go back to space, preferably orbit, space station. I would love to bring a medical research mission and then help land those results successfully back on Earth for accelerated acceptance by patients and doctors. I may or may not end up going to space. And in the meantime, I am thoroughly enjoying meeting people from biotech, space biotech, pharma, everybody for whom medical research might be answered with why space. So that's my passion now, and I'm learning a lot, meeting new people, and always looking for great ways to inspire other people about my journey to space and now beyond.
Well, don't stop. This is a very fascinating and inspiring time that we're in. And I think that we need a lot of voices to remind people why it matters and why we have something to look up to. Because there's so much noise about all the doom and gloom and why or how the solutions are actually to go back and to stop, when in reality it's quite the opposite. The solutions are ahead of us and it's just a question of figuring them out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. If there's one thing that I think space does for us, it helps us to always keep looking up. There are changes in brain chemistry for the positive that when we physically gaze up at space, it helps elevate our mood and helps us be ready to do more things. So even intellectually, we think about it a lot. I think we can feel it as well. So that would be my final part of wisdom is onward and upward always.
Always. Onward, upward, onward, let it go. This is one of my mantras. Dr. Green, looking forward for our next time together.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for having me.